Good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. My name is Annie Plancher. I'm a vice president at social finance in the US, and today's topic of skilling is very near to my heart. We focused on issues of economic mobility through outcomes-based financing tools like the Social Impact Bond and our newest tool, the Career Impact Bond, which is a student-friendly form of income share agreement that focuses really specifically on reskilling and upskilling for low-income individuals and is more relevant now than ever in this COVID-19 moment. I'll be moderating the discussion for the next 45 minutes, and before I introduce our panelists, let me quickly set the context for our conversation. The International Labor Organization's 2020 World Employment Outlook shared a picture of persistent inequality and exclusion, highlighting that about 470 million people around the world were underutilized in the labor market, and that means unemployed, underemployed, or eligible to work but not participating. The report highlighted two other facts that will be familiar to all of our panelists and many on the line. First, that employment doesn't guarantee economic security, with 1 in 5 employed workers in extreme or moderate poverty. And second, that these challenges are not distributed evenly across geographies or across populations, with outsized impacts faced by women, young people, and migrants around the world. That report didn't even mention COVID-19 because it wasn't on our radar yet. Since early this spring, as we have seen, the global workforce has flipped on its head. People are working from home, working fewer hours or for reduced pay, or out of work entirely. In Q2 of this year, the ILO estimated a loss of 14% of working hours around the world, and that equates to about 400 million jobs. So this decrease in employment, which arose in just a few months, is on the same scale as the global underutilization that we've been working on for decades. Or put another way, our labor market challenges have nearly doubled. As many of our panelists remarked on our prep call last week, some industries are shrinking, and what skills are relevant have changed rapidly in the COVID-19 environment. So what can we, as experts in outcomes-based financing, do to help? How can our models adapt to meet the growing need to reskill and upskill to get our global workforce moving in the right direction again? I am very lucky to be joined by experts from around the world to discuss these questions. So let's dive right in with introductions. And maybe I'll start with Maha. And just ask you, can you quickly introduce yourself and talk about how you are engaged in this outcomes-based financing landscape in the skilling and employment world?
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. So I'm Maha Keramane. I work for BNP Paribas in the CSR group department, and specifically on impact measurement and on impact bonds. So we've started working on that a while now, since 2015, and we've structured and invested in around 10 social impact bonds around the world, specifically in France, Belgium, but also in the US. And we recently also launched an investment fund with the European Investment Fund in order to drain some investments into this product. So we really believe in the social impact bonds and in outcome-based financing. And I must say that employment is the main thematic on which we have been doing this kind of instruments. It can be on mobility, it can be on how to bring very long-term unemployed to employment. It could be people getting out of prison. It can be young NEETs also looking for jobs. So it's always, there's a lot around employment because it's an issue that is both, I would say, measurable. There are some very known metrics on that, and also it's a clinging problem in all countries that we are working in. And outcome-based contract is a very powerful tool on this, because it helps really prevent some issues before they're coming in. So the governments are very eager to put this in place in order to replace the allocations that they have to give to unemployed people by process that prevent them from falling to unemployment. So, and I think today is, even as you were saying, Annie, a real challenge.
Thank you, Maha. Dr. Bala, can I pass it to you?
Thank you, everybody. I am a professor of accounting in Dhaka University, Bangladesh. But earlier I was in a securities regulator in Bangladesh as commissioner. And for that reason, I was also involved in NAB impact investing in Bangladesh. And my expertise in accounting, so how ESG disclosure and measurements are related to impact investment. Recently, NAB Bangladesh also completed a research work on impact investing landscape in Bangladesh. I was associated with that study also. And hopefully my area will be how securities instrument or capital market instruments can help in solving this upskilling challenge due to COVID-19. Thank you.
To come off mute. Thank you, Dr. Bala. Andy, can I pass to you?
Great. Good morning, everybody, from a rainy day in New York City. It is lovely to be here with all of you. And this is a topic that is very near and dear to the work we do. I am the co-founder and managing partner at Make Home Capital, where we have an investment fund focused on outcomes financing. We expect at our final close to be north of $50 million. We've already deployed a little bit more than 10 million in projects across the US designed to really do what we're all talking about, which is align government spending with the outcomes we're looking for and really leverage private capital to help do that. One of the focuses of our fund has always been on workforce development. So helping people get a job, keep that job, and advance in that job. With COVID-19, we really have sort of deepened our focus on that area. And I'm really excited to engage in this more global conversation about how we can use this tool more effectively to scale effective workforce development or upskilling and reskilling programs. Prior to founding Make Home Capital, I was at Goldman Sachs, where I led Goldman's social impact bond investments. As folks may know, Goldman was the first financial institution to make one of those investments, and that was something we were incredibly proud of. I also was the head of the Goldman Sachs Social Impact Fund, which was Goldman's first signature product in the signature offering, I should say, in the impact investing space for Goldman's clients. Prior to that, I also ran large-scale workforce development programs in the US. And one of the things that excites me is that these projects enable me to bring both my on-the-ground management and understanding of the issues surrounding getting low-wage workers into the better jobs with my finance experience. So really thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. And it looks like we have temporarily, hopefully only temporarily, lost Jawad. So we will have him introduce himself when he makes his way back onto the screen. So why don't we dive into the discussion? And why don't we start, actually, Andy, I'll start with you. Would love to hear a little bit more about how COVID-19 has impacted your approach to sourcing new projects in the skilling space. Would love to hear a bit about the learning journey you've been on and what parts of your process you've really had to adapt in this moment.
Sure, thank you. So, as you really eloquently opened us with, the stats are pretty daunting. And if there were global challenges around workforce development before COVID, as you said, they've doubled. And we're really seeing that across the US as well. What we've done as a team is really use this time, particularly in the early days of the public health crisis, when it was really about addressing immediate needs in communities, to say, what can we do as a team to prepare ourselves for what we know is going to be a key piece of the recovery, both from an economic development standpoint in terms of helping businesses have the skilled workers they need, and also from the worker perspective, and how do we help people get back to work when the jobs they had before may no longer exist or may look really, really different. So we spend a lot of time really trying to understand what are the different employer needs, and not just on the surface, but to really say, okay, folks are talking about cybersecurity. What does cybersecurity really mean in terms of the actual jobs that are out there? How can we try and position the folks that we're targeting, who are really typically at the bottom end of the labor market, think about that as a realistic opportunity? You know, lots of folks have been at the low end of the labor market, have been in the service industry. You know, here in New York City, restaurants are just beginning to open up. It's the same story in cities and states across the US. How can we think about what other jobs those folks can pivot into? So that's really one important piece where we focused. The other place where we really had to focus was, what does learning look like in the context of COVID, right? Classroom learning is going to be very different. The scale of that learning is going to be very different. There's been huge advances in remote learning. But again, trying to dive into it a little more deeply and say, what are best practices in terms of taking a disadvantaged population and helping them pivot to remote learning? There's some very basic questions about getting folks access to technology. But what we've also learned is that it's not just a piece of hardware and connectivity, that's not enough. That there really is a first step, high touch piece of this around actually helping people use those tools, as we're seeing on our Zoom call, right? We've lost somebody, right? Who my guess is spends a lot of his days every day on Zoom. It took me 15 minutes this morning to get online here. We need to make sure that the folks we're expecting to access this kind of remote learning have the kinds of one-on-one supports they need to be able to do that. So that's some of the work we've been doing. As we've seen the pivot from immediate needs more into recovery, we've seen a real growth in conversations about workforce development and employment with the government partners and workforce development providers we've been talking to, as well as from our investors. And I think there's really, this is a moment in time where there is a collective focus on workforce development, and also a real belief that this new outcomes-based structure can drive better outcomes for the folks who desperately need these services. As Maha said, we actually have really good, clear metrics, right? Wages. And, you know, it's pretty universally accepted that more wages are better, right? It's a good proxy for number of hours. It's what income is coming into a household. And so what we're finding is that there are a lot of very productive conversations going on, yet within the context of shrinking local budgets and shrinking state budgets, and at least in the US context. And, but again, we view that as an opportunity, because outcomes financing both enables government to better target their resources to the projects that are working in a very real way, and because the use of upfront investment capital enables them to pay at a later time. And then in that case, really align payment with the economic recovery that we're hoping for. And so I think that is a really exciting combination. And so what we're seeing is both increased interest as well as more motivation to embrace some of these approaches, as we all need to be more creative.
Thank you, Andy. Maha or Dr. Bala, do you have any response on this topic of sort of adapting the process and you know, who we're serving, the providers, and the interest that's been generated?
Yes, if I may, I completely agree with what Andy was saying. It's the topic of having you know, clear metrics and we are in a context where those clear metrics, maybe they don't have any more signification, because either they are compared with historical data which didn't take into account the crisis. So we need to adapt to this new context to maybe set new indicators. But also maybe today, it's less about increasing wages, but just, you know, maintaining unemployment. So we see in a lot of our projects that the service provider was like, okay, my purpose, my outcome was increasing the wages, increasing the standard of living, increasing employment. But today, it's not what's relevant, and it's not what really serves the beneficiaries. Today, what serves the beneficiaries is to be with them, to avoid them losing a job, or to avoid, or if they lose their job, to support them to go and look for administrative rights or things like that. So how can we shift to another type of intervention, because today is what is needed. So I completely agree that we need to keep this flexibility and adapt to the actual needs of the beneficiaries in this crisis.
Just putting in one final point, I think how I would describe it is we're having a lot of conversations that are, how do we redefine success within the context of COVID? And I absolutely agree, Maha, that it looks different. But what I would say is the work of bringing together government, service providers, and community leaders, with, in a sense, the investor being the sort of entity or partner that helps knit this public-private partnership together to come to an agreement as to how do we define success in the context of COVID, is incredibly powerful in terms of creating a direction moving forward and a strategy, and the framework to be able to sort of assess how we're doing and make mid-course corrections, which is really the only way that this is going to work.
Just one point, Andy, how you have mentioned government initiative in selecting different projects they are coming forward, but how you are engaging private sectors. That means those who have really capacity to come forward in this crisis, how you are engaging those private sector in choosing your projects?
That's a great question, Dr. Bala. And actually this is or Andy, did you want to?
Yeah, I can just, yes. So just to jump in, I think that's a great, really, really important point. None of this happens without employers at the table, right? They're the ones who understand their needs. And the foundation of all of the workforce development programs we're pursuing really is a deep employer connection. By way of example, we're working with a provider that helps match local residents with a large focus on people of color into construction jobs, which are growing and are happening during COVID. This organization was founded and is supported by a group of actually affordable housing developers. And so it is at the foundation of our service provider partner is that they are embedded in that employer network. But absolutely, it has to meet both needs.
Yeah. Maha, I might turn to you for a minute, and actually the topic of engaging employers is relevant with you as well. I would love to hear a little bit about how, you know, we talked a bit at the prep call about how the financing structures themselves are being affected, and you talked a little bit a moment ago about indicators and how are we actually measuring success. I'd love to hear from your perspective, both how you are seeing some of the financing tools themselves be adapted, but also what are we learning about how we might need to be more flexible or adaptable in the future?
Okay. Yes, as we were saying, the employment context is changing. So we have beneficiaries who are having activities who are being stopped. So virtually, what is going to be the success of the program? So we need to see how to adapt the whole process, because we've talked about digitalization, etc. But for example, in our projects, we have a lot of projects that before COVID was already looking at digitalization, for example. So they already had this, but they didn't expect the fact that employment market is going to be down, and that the impact of their beneficiary is going to be very, very affected. We also have sourcing difficulties to source the beneficiaries, for example, in jails or in other types of structures, because the people weren't able to go there. So from my point of view, what is being very helpful is the fact that in our contracts, we have a very flexible governance structure, which goes above the contract and which is written as such. It means that the governance, being the state, so the commissioners, any final payers, the service provider, and the body of the investors, are able to, if they agree together on something, change whatever is in the contract with a lot of flexibility, with a lot of open-minded mindsets, in order to always go towards a win-win situation and say, okay, this was not what we agreed on, but this is not the situation when we signed. So we need to go forward, and we need to have this flexibility and this open-mindedness. There's also another thing that we put in place as structures systematically is what I called during the call, but I think you liked it, is hazard envelopes, which is actually envelopes that are agreed upon from the very beginning. They are in the budget of the investors when they ask for their commitment. They are in the envelopes of the commissioners when they go to ask also for the authorization, but they are triggered only if there is a problem. So here today, there were a lot of cases where we would have loved to have hazard envelopes to be triggered. So I think this is also a good practice that we can build upon. Then there's the change of set of indicators. Maybe we can have alternative sets of indicators where we can, have say, okay, those are the normal indicators, but maybe we can have also contextual indicators. If the context changes, maybe we can measure averages from the year that is current, and not averages compared to what happened on the last 10 years, for example. This is, for example, one example. But there are a lot of alternative sets of indicators that we could have if we have those kind of crises. And I would say finally, the priority is to have always in mind the good of the beneficiaries. We are talking outcomes. Do we have to change to outputs? Or, well, this is not the problem. We need to see what the beneficiaries need to put them priority to everything. So this is something, for example, in my organization, I went to the executive management and told them, okay, if we want to go following up social impact bonds, we need to take action, and we need to say that the first principle is the beneficiaries, whatever is the consequence on our interests on investors. It means that if we need to lose returns or any kind of money because it is the best way of serving the beneficiaries and serving also in second the service provider's interest, because if the service provider fails, then there's no action anymore. So also the financial interests of the service provider, it needs to go first. But I needed, to have this plan written very in a certain way, and also be able to negotiate if in an open mind with the government. If the government puts something in the table that is more flexible, then the investor should also say, okay, you are being more flexible, then we also need to be more flexible on our returns or expectations or whatever. So I would say those are the main, sets that I would, my main learnings, key messages that I wanted to give today.
Thank you, Maha. No, that's really helpful, and actually relates to something that we've been thinking about at Social Finance in the US, which is, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Andy, a lot of our programs, one of the things we focus on is meeting that beneficiary need and thinking about sort of not just the skilling and the training, but also what are all the wraparound supports that these individuals might need, which have actually increased in this time of COVID, with childcare being a problem for a lot of individuals. Obviously, transportation in non-COVID times is always an issue, and sort of what are those different needs. And for us, one of the things that we've been really having to think about a lot is the structure itself, and can some of our financing structures with investors at the table work when we have sort of higher cost because there's higher need. And so one thing that we're working on right now is we're calling them pay it forward funds. And our idea was, I think someone said something around, I think, Andy, you said this, the collective nature of folks addressing the problem and people coming to the table. And we've really seen this and been excited about it. So what we're doing is talking to governments, local governments, so sort of at the state level, in addition to funders, investors, et cetera, and saying, are there some sectors and some job categories for which we could structure a fund that really actually recycles, so that, you know, if the returns, rather than going back to investors, could just go back into the fund to support future learners going through these skills trainings, you actually have more flexibility to meet some of those wraparound needs. And of course, that's not going to work all the time. And sometimes we have programs that are ripe for our traditional funds with the investors. But we've sort of been playing with how do you balance different types of financing structures to meet these changing needs in this moment. So we're excited about that. We'll see how they develop. But Dr. Bala or Andy, any other reflections on governance and the other sort of financing structuring questions that Maha raised?
Actually, already you are dealing some sort of social impact fund, say, which started before COVID-19. But these issues, this unemployment issue or upskilling issue, this comes later on after COVID-19 issue. And whether you have any plan to restructure those already ongoing social impact bonds to incorporate these issues so that beneficiaries can be benefited more? Or do you have any plan to issue any sort of new social impact bond incorporating these issues? That means how to upskill the beneficiaries, or how you can incorporate some aspects of social return so that COVID affected or other unemployed people might be benefited more.
Yes, I don't know if the question was for me, but in our case, yes, we are actually restructuring some of our projects in order to, and it's really actually changes the type of intervention where we were expecting to have plus X jobs, new jobs during 2 years' time. It's actually about how we shift the intervention, because the service provider also feels the need into a more maybe short-term but really intensive support to, as I was saying, avoid losing the job, or how to adapt to a new, partial activity, or how to or how to be able, if you lose your job, to quickly actionate all the benefits, social benefits that are available, because a lot of people are not really aware of that, and it can be very dreadful for them. So it's kind of shifting to this short-term need, which will have a consequence on unemployment, a positive consequence on employment, but which is more adapted to what we see today during the crisis. And we also have programs, as you were saying, I think, Annie, on mediation, meaning that you are working both with the employers and with the beneficiaries in order to actually create the job which actually suits the employer's needs, but also suits the competencies of the employee, and they actually put them together instead of being one responding to an offer of the other, is actually co-creating the job that will suit both employers and employee, and brings more motivation actually to both of them. So it's a new way of rethinking that.
Thanks, Maha. Dr. Bala, I might turn to you and would love to hear from your perspective, sort of what types of outcomes-based financing structures are you particularly excited about as we look towards COVID-19 recovery, but also what makes these sorts of pay-for-results instruments particularly promising as we look at the skilling challenges of this moment? And actually, as you begin to answer, for folks in the audience, we will shift to Q&A after this. So if you want to start typing questions in the chat, we can shift to those in a moment.
Oh, okay. Actually, outcome-based financing structure. I once worked in security regulator and mainly dealing with the securitization of all sort of financing actually. In this COVID-19 pandemic situation, you see, other than direct cash transfer or government spending, there are also different soft loans or soft credits to the business people or employers. So I think from the perspective of securities capital market instruments, these financing may be restructured to make it actually in terms of capital market instruments which can be tradable in the OTC market or in the even it might be listed in the stock exchanges, so that sometimes even government might have limitation, but some people due to forced limited expenditure, they are accumulating surplus also. They can be the angel investors also towards this social endeavor. And when any credit or loan or any financing can be securitized, then actually it is easy to be, that is marketable. It can be easily made marketable so that many people come here, or those who have funded initially, they can exit the chain actually. So within a time horizon, securitization might be the more important lucrative issue, and then intermediation also becomes very easier. And I think main outcome now should be, from our perspective, how to increase the employment actually. And this employment, not only fresh employment, it is also the laid off or furloughed workers due to this pandemic area. And in our country, there is a recent survey actually, more than 98% of our poor, they have say lost their employment. That means they were engaged in actually some sort of employment with limited income, but even that has gone due to this pandemic. But government has huge say policy response with huge bail-off fund, and in some cases these are some sort of donations, but in most of the cases to the employer or entrepreneurs, these are given as a soft loan or with say limited interest rate. I think most innovative way should be how it can be actually securitized, and this should be actually transformed into capital market instrument, not money market instrument. If it is capital market instrument with fixed return actually, then it might be lucrative to the surplus fund provider. And in this case actually conventional securities, say equity, might not be lucrative. Otherwise, as Maha mentioned, that means environmental impact bond or social impact bond, that can be actually more useful. But one of our previous colleagues, they have taken on initiative actually. They want to start a social business with other type of impact. Actually, if those type of initiatives, say I can mention, that is their target is how say unused or post-use domestic different plastic products or other things can be converted into IoT say product, and there are a few technology experts, if they can be upskilled by some training actually, they can convert this thing. That means some wastage might be converted into IoT things through upskill training, and then self-employment might be generated. Even those entrepreneur might create more employment actually, and in that case actually equity instrument might be more helpful. So there are a lot of initiatives actually but I think we have to motivate the real surplus fund suppliers so that they, but if it is real impact investment, they must come forward actually. So I think real sector must be developed through these upskilling issues, and when this real sector will be developed, then fund providers will come also, and if it is securitized, then securitized means it might be collective investment scheme instrument, or it might be exchange traded fund instrument, or it might be that social impact fund or bond, or even environmental impact bond. Particularly our linear economy must be converted into circular economy so that wastage can be converted into wealth. If that social entrepreneurs come forward, they should be given some sort of finance to even might be impact fund or venture capital fund, and ultimately if it is securitized, that can be easily transferable, so that say if anybody in problem to exit from this chain, they can easily exit actually if market is available. And I think transaction cost also be very minimum. And my suggestion will be actually this upskilling program should be taken in such a way so that say social enterprise can be developed in a better way, and then even equity support can be given with minimum cost actually. That might be the way.
Thank you, Dr. Bala. And I see we have Jawad back. Welcome. I might turn it to you, Jawad, and just to give you a quick, I think, of what you missed. I think you heard a lot of what Dr. Bala just spoke on, but we started the conversation around how we've been adapting these sort of outcomes-based structures in light of COVID. So talking about everything from what sectors we're focused on and how we're, what the need of the beneficiary is and how that sort of affects the work itself and the focus, and then the financing and the need for flexibility in financing. We talked a lot about outcomes and how do you think about indicators and outputs and outcomes in this COVID moment, and maybe shifting, for example, from increased wages to job, maintaining a job. So would love to just turn it to you, and maybe you can give a quick introduction and what you're focused on, and then maybe just a quick reflection on how COVID-19 has affected your work. I know you work a lot in partnerships. We've talked about the collective nature of folks addressing this challenge. So we'd just love to hear sort of your reflections on the past 6 months.
Thank you, Annie. I'm very sorry, everybody, I just got dropped out and then it was hard to come back. Let me just race through my comments. So my name is Jawad Khan and I lead the largest skills development fund in Pakistan. It's called PSTF. We fund trainings of over 100,000 young men and women every year. And we do that through almost 500 training partners. We're a not-for-profit fund. But every single training partner, whether this is a training institute or businesses, have to commit to us a contractual employment commitment. And we never pay them on input. We pay them based on 4 metrics. The first one is contract to enrollment ratio. We just want to make sure that their targeting is right. The second one is the enrollment to completion ratio, which means that the people that are really interested, that join the program to complete it. The third one is completion to certification ratio. We want to make sure that people also pass and see whether they've learned something. And the last one is, which is very important, is certification to verified employment outcome ratio. We have a third-party monitoring system where we make sure, and 20% of every contractor payments are linked to employment commitments that they've given to us. So that's how we've linked our entire funding of our training partners to very specific, measurable, and tangible outcomes that they have to commit, outputs that they have to commit to us. I also run, just very quickly, the second part of your question, I also run the National Accelerator on closing the skills job in Pakistan. It's called Parvaz. It's been set up in partnership with the World Economic Forum. The objective was to try and see the impact of automation and technology on the workforce, existing workforce, and see what kind of reskilling, upskilling, and new skilling needs would have to be incorporated to make sure that this existing workforce is future ready. We launched it last year in July. Pre-COVID, it was all about, yes, we can see the automation and technology coming our way, but it really isn't today. It's probably more like a more medium to long-term threat to our business model and to our workforce. So let's put together a 3-year action plan. Then COVID happened, and we have more than 40 most influential business leaders from across the country in 6 sectors represented on our platform. The focus changed overnight. Number one, what happened was that automation and technology that was supposed to happen in more mid to long term, that needed to happen overnight for these businesses to ensure business continuity. Number two, what happened was that the workforces had to be immediately reskilled, upskilled, and new skilled for them to stay relevant compared to the business, which means, the retail business was shut down, on-site retail was shut down. Online retail has to be set up. So digital marketeers, data integrators, data system managers became very important. Banking went online completely because the branch banking got shut down. So immediately cybersecurity became so important, and hence the reliance on online learning platforms. What has happened then pre-COVID, the partnerships have been very resilient. They have stayed. However, what needed to happen in 3 years needs to now happen within 6 months. So within every working panel, we've now set up skills incubators where the industry is now putting money in. Industry has the demand, and industry is deciding what to teach them and how to teach them. And we're putting roles in, and they need to see the output within the next 6 months. Because it's all outcomes based, because all these people that are going into these incubators are going to get hired by industry, and we completely have industry behind this. So we're running pilots now, but it's going to seriously scale over the next 6 months. And that is where there's a huge opportunity for impact financing coming into that space.
Thank you, Jawad, and really glad to have your perspective on this panel. I know we only have 2 minutes, so probably won't have time to get to the audience Q&A, but I will actually ask, and if folks want to direct questions to us, all of us after this, please do. But I would love to just maybe go around one more time and just any closing thoughts, reflections on sort of what you're most excited about looking at outcomes-based financing in addressing these labor market challenges, or alternatively, what you're most worried about. And maybe, Andy, I'll start with you. I'm Brady Bunch around, and you're on my left.
Great. Thank you. So, I really believe that this is an opportunity, and that the tools we collectively bring to the table for addressing social challenges, this is really a moment in terms of workforce development. Because the need is so great, but with that need comes opportunity. So it is bringing new folks to the table who might otherwise have been a little hesitant. But the current sort of economic and public health crisis is bringing those folks to the table. And that's something we're really optimistic about. Building on the comments earlier about securitization, I also think it brings an opportunity to pivot this market to scale. The consistency of outcome metrics, literally globally, around employment and workforce development, I think provide the opportunity that the field of outcomes financing has been looking for to be able to securitize and really pivot this market to scale. And most important, I think, to have impact at a scale. And I do feel like this conversation, we haven't really talked about racial justice issues. And I think they are so embedded, particularly in the US context, but also globally, on access to economic opportunity, that as we are creating projects on the ground, and we are really holding ourselves accountable to this, we need to think about how people of color have been impacted over time and how to sort of right that, but also on a forward-looking basis. So cautiously optimistic.
Thank you, Andy. Maha, you are next on my screen.
Okay. I want to be optimistic, so I would say that I think at some point everyone is going to realize that this tool, not just because it's an innovative tool, but because the logic behind this tool is to give priority to prevention above any curative action. It's logical. So for me, the logic at one point is going to strike everyone. And that's why outcome-based financing still has, from my point of view, a lot of future, especially in the employment context. But then there's the scarcity of the resources, public resources. But then again, it's going to strike them that it's a more efficient use of public resources. So at some point, the two are going to come together. And as we were talking about those new way of trying to change the way we employ, there are going to be, everyone is getting out of coal and everyone wants to do renewable. So at some point, people should skill people that were working into coal into the new product, which is renewable energies. Just an example, but I mean, this is obvious. So we need to take them, otherwise they're going to be unemployed at some point. And the other ones, that we're going to have a shortage of people knowing how to operate renewable energy. So it's just shifting the one from another, and it needs to be done in a prevention mindset, because anticipate what is going to change. So for me, outcome-based financing is that it's not just the mechanism, it's the mindset that should be obvious and logical for everyone. So I want to be optimistic.
Jawad.
Yeah, so what keeps us really energized is the speed and the agility at which now the industry has started to move. It has been shaken out of its slumber and complacence, and it really understands that upskilling and new skilling is not necessarily a great thing to do, but it is critical for business continuity. And I think the speed at which this is moving, and how we're able to galvanize the support, and how the whole industry across sectors is coalescing behind this effort is fantastic. What really is worrisome is two things. One, of course, the governments, and this is not something that the industry can do itself. The governments are still far behind in terms of understanding, recognizes, and responding to the upskilling and the reskilling challenge. And the second, which is critical, is the next wave. This is all great if we have clarity in terms of when it's going to be business as usual. But if we get into multiple new waves of pandemic, then this whole momentum is going to start losing steam very, very quickly.
Thank you. And Dr. Bala.
I'm also very optimistic, because this global crisis has created a global cooperation, also collective cooperation through digital platform and other things. And another thing is outcome-based financing is not new. I think it should be reshaped into, in case of financing, when disbursement linked indicators are defined, how it can be related to social impact and environment impact, so that ultimately, even it can be linked with new generation of employment, or that means self-employment, then it can be purposeful for our purpose actually. And I think always any sort of crisis creates opportunities for changes also, and hopefully our outcome-based financing or any securitization will pass through radical redesign, so that it can work in a better way.
Yes, and I would echo what all of you said. We often talk about outcomes-based financing as some of the principles of it around bringing different sectors together and really aligning on outcomes and just getting everyone to focus. And I think in this particular moment, having these tools that really bring people together and focus can lead to that mindset change that you mentioned, Maha, and the behavior changes that can hopefully really make a difference. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to the attendees who have stayed with us for 6 extra minutes. I know I am in the way of the next session, so we will end here and hope that you all have great rest of your days.